616.
Now, are you interested in the fact that when the folks first built the house, that the only other house on Edison was the Ford house?
Well, let's start with
Or
this.
not?
Let's start with just the fact that you were neighbors of the Fords and that your father was a rabbi, and let's see where that takes us.
All right.
Okay? Anytime you can start telling us that. So, what did your father do?
My father was a Reform rabbi coming to Detroit, starting at the pulpit at Temple Bethel in 1899. Came here from his first pulpit, which was in Omaha, Nebraska.
And you can go ahead and tell me about being neighbors with the Fords.
There were, in 1911, when my parents built their house, there were only 2 other houses on that block, and Henry Ford lived in what would have at that time been considered the elegant house of the area, and the other occupant was Horace Rackham, who was associated with Ford.
Tell me as much or as little as you want about your family and Ford cars.
Mr. Ford used to pass by very frequently in his own car, and he was friendly. It was not an intimate relationship. And in 1913, he gave Father his first car. We, as a family, were not privileged to have a car at that time, and it was very exciting. And it made us able to take trips which we could not have taken otherwise. And the first trip we took, we went to the coast of Massachusetts, and it was a fun trip. I was the youngest of 3 children, and we were all quite young when we took this trip, and my father was the only one that was driving, and the luggage was taped onto the top and the back of the car, and sometimes it fell off.
Note to not transfer the first take.
I think it's fine.
Oh, you think it's fine? Oh, okay.
You think so?
Okay, great.
Well, we can check it later
Yeah.
too. I'll just mark it.
Those comments made on the first take, seems like they had audio problems or camera problems.
Hang on one second, Margaret. Let me get focused.
Where were we? Brakes failing. Tell me about the brakes.
Our trips were fun and interesting. Sometimes we wondered if we would be able to make the hills because Father had a tendency to ride the clutch and the brakes would sometimes burn out. But we did get to the coast and we had fine trips as a result of this. And we always felt that Mr. Ford did give us our start in that respect. And for 6 succeeding years, he did give Father a car. And he was always interested and friendly as to how we were making out. And Father told one story about, and this is much later, and on a winter night when he was cranking the car, trying to crank the car, and he was not very good at mechanical things, and Mr. Ford came along and said, "Oh, Dr. Franklin, you should not be doing that. That's too hard for you." And he insisted on starting the car himself. Unfortunately, the gifts of the Ford cars stopped at the same time as the anti-Semitic diatribes in the Durban Independent were taking place. The last car that Mr. Ford gave Father was a specially built, well-equipped car, more like a Cadillac than a Ford. But Father felt he could not accept it under these circumstances. And Mr. Ford had great difficulty in understanding how he could be a friend of his and Father not be able to accept it. He was unable to separate the facts. But the car was returned, much to the chagrin of the young people in the family. But that, I have often said, as an adult, we probably never would have had anything but a Ford. But the Fords, the Model Ts in those days, were a little bit different, obviously, than they are today.
Can you tell me, for an audience that doesn't know, or for my kids who are teenagers, what was Ford saying in the Dearborn Independent that prompted your father to return the car?
Well, I really can't do that justice. He blamed the Jews for all the troubles of the world, really. Tied it up with Bolshevism, too. And I really do not feel qualified to discuss that adequately.
Is it possible for you to talk about how you as a little girl may have felt in your family with your neighbor saying these things about Jews?
Well, it was a very upsetting feeling. It was hard to understand. It had a very demoralizing effect on the whole Jewish community. I had mixed feelings about it later on, hearing that for the most part, I think respectable Jewish people stopped buying Ford cars, which of course was devastating to Mr. Ford. Again, he could not understand the correlation between that. But
What was it in Ford? You were telling me this earlier about Ford being. What was it in Ford's personality or his makeup that made it impossible for him to see this connection between?
I don't really like to be quoted on this.
Oh, let's not then. If it's.
No, I mean the world knows that Mr. Ford was a genius in his own line, but he didn't believe in education. He was not an educated man. In fact, he was considered ignorant by many, many people. There were other sides to him. He had a gentle side. He was very much interested in birds, and he chose his friends well. He was a friend of Burroughs, and he was a friend of Edison's. His relationship within his own family was a difficult one. He was not fair to his only son, Edsel, and everyone knows that. He would not let him go to college. He never accepted the fact that he had cancer. And as I recall, I think he said that he had undulant fever. And but he didn't have any depth of feeling or understanding of people.
Tell me a little bit more about actually, just tell me again, in whatever words you like, the fact that Ford could not understand why your father wouldn't take the car. That's a very important point.
Mr. Ford talked to Father, saying that he was his friend, and he separated the fact that Father was a rabbi and a Jew, and an ardent one. He simply thought of him as a man who was a friend of his, which again I feel showed the lack of depth of any kind of feeling on Mr. Ford's part. He did have some Jewish friends.
Did he have any sense, do you think, of the damage that this was doing?
Well, you get in, I don't want you to tape this, but then you get into that whole area of his having the International Jew, the volume that was so
Let's cut for 1 second.
Hold on, Margaret.
Okay, you can say.
I can remember in college being horrified at seeing a copy of the International Jew on a library shelf. And it was taken off after I called it to their attention. Father had been instrumental in having it removed from many, many libraries throughout the country. And Ford had claimed that he had discontinued the circulation of it. But there were many inconsistencies in those stories.
We've just run out of film. I'm going to change.
Hang on, Mark. Let me get focused.
Let me remind you to, you can sort of look more over toward this direction. There you go, over toward me or Leslie. There we go. Okay, you can start out with just the fact that your father was a rabbi and take it from there.
My father was a Reformed rabbi, and Henry Ford was a neighbor. He used to pass our house on daily. And in 1913, he asked Father if he would be willing to accept a car as a gift. And at that time, Franklin's had no car, and we were thrilled at the idea of having one. And I believe, I'm not certain, I think our first car was an open car. I remember a picture. And we took our whole family, there were three children and my parents, drove all the way to Massachusetts in a Model T with the luggage, the baggage strapped onto the luggage carriers on the outside. Sometimes they fell off, sometimes we stopped, and sometimes we wondered if we were going to make the hills around Albany particularly and through the Berkshires, but we usually did. Occasionally we had burned out brakes, but we were always able to fix them. But it made the difference in our having enjoyable vacations, or probably staying very close to Detroit in the early years. And Mr. Ford was kind enough to provide a car for 6 consecutive years. And the last year, which I believe was about 1920, during the time of the Dearborn Independent articles, Father felt he could not, in good conscience, accept this last car, which was a specially equipped car. And I'm sure that at that time it meant quite a sacrifice to refuse it. But he did, and Mr. Ford had great difficulty in understanding why his good friend didn't accept his gift.
Do you remember how you came to know about this? Do you remember being told about this, or did you hear about it? Or
Well, it was just part of the family. I don't remember exactly how it was discussed, but it was a fact that the father simply could not keep it.
because of a matter of conscience?
Yes. That Ford was being destructive in ways that could never be remedied. He did damage throughout the world that was never retracted, really. It was done.
Did you, as a little girl or as a young woman in a Jewish household, was it the feeling in the household that Ford was just a nut, or was this something that a strain in America that he was voicing? Do you follow what I'm saying? Was he an aberration, or was he part of simply a
I don't think that anti-Semitism as such was so current. It was Ford's vicious influence at that time.
Do you have any recollections? I asked you earlier about the Ku Klux Klan. Do you have any recollections of the Ku Klux Klan and anti-Semitism or anti?
I remember being in Ann Arbor at a game and seeing a cross burned across a field in the distance. I think that was the time Denby was head of the Navy, and he had been talking in Ann Arbor, and it was a kind of a protest, but there was I don't recall any Klan activity that affected us personally.
Do you remember being aware of the Klan as an anti-Semitic organization, or no?
Yes, I knew it was an anti-Semitic organization. It was anti-black and anti-Jewish.
Let's cut for 1 second. Okay, Margaret, when I get focused here, what I'm going to have you talk a little bit about is, do you remember Ford's apology to Jews for the articles?
I wish you had told me about this before, because that whole area was so. There were the two times, there was the time that I showed you much later.
Yeah, I'm talking about the earlier one. Or just, do you have any recollections of it from your own childhood?
I don't really know what to say about that. It was. Well, he retracted and there was always question as to whether his original retraction was the way he felt or not. It was a big blot on history, but it was. You better strike that, because I'm doing very poorly on this, and I really feel very bad. There was never. You want me to talk?
Yeah, you can start. Sure.
There was never any question of our being anything but Jewish, but we were definitely Americans. My father was criticized for. There is no such thing as being too American, but he felt that it was extremely important to be part of the community, and he was an outstanding person in the community. He was on the library board and the symphony and all the things that were important to the community. And he saw the city grow from a little tiny town that was important as a cultural center, too.
Was it safe to say then it was important to him and to the family to be American?
I don't think that would have ever have been discussed that way, because it was just an assumed thing. We were Americans.
And so it was just simply not an issue.
No, it really wasn't. It was that whole area would be a very complicated and at one time was controversial in the city because father was a rabbi of the city. He was given a doctorate degree by the Catholic University of Detroit.
Let's do one. I swear this is the last thing.
I know, but I just feel like I
No,
really screwed that
No,
up
no,
badly.
You're doing absolutely fine. Just as you know, I'm in love with the story about the cars. I want to do it. I want to do it one last time. And can you tell us the story of the cars? And you can skip the trip to Massachusetts. How about that?
You want one up?
Yeah.
You want one to northern Michigan before the
No, I just-
before the streets were paved?
No, I think just you can just simply tell us the fact that the cars made a big difference in the family's life. But you can just start with the fact that your father was a rabbi and take it from there. This is the last time, I
All
promise.
right. My father was a rabbi, and we were neighbors of Henry Ford. And Henry Ford gave father the first car that we ever owned. And he gave him one annually for 6 years. At the time of the gift of the seventh car, the Dearborn Independent was publishing its anti-Semitic material. And father did not feel that he could, in good faith, accept a gift from a man whose sentiments were so anti-Semitic. And it was very difficult for Mr. Ford to understand why his good friend could not continue to accept a gift from him.
Do you think Henry Ford ever understood?
I doubt it. I doubt if Mr. Ford really ever was able to separate the fact that father was a friend and he was the anti-Semite.
Excellent. Fantastic. That's it.
This is room tone. Room tone.